No clouds dared disrupt the pale blue Kansas sky that morning, and the low wind from the Flint Hills carried dust that adhered to boots and muttered under doors. Red Willow Crossing had 3 streets, a mercantile, a stable, a church with a broken bell, and a telegraph pole leaning east. Although the railway hadn't reached thus far yet in 1877, the smoke in the horizon told Clara as the sun rose above the hills. Hayes didn't make a sound. Her lips were cracked, her eyes swollen, and every inch of her skin burned from hours in the open. Her 2 boys were tied to the fence post like she was. Micah was 12, but already had his father's jawline. Everly was 6, had curled against his mother's skirt. Each breeze blew Clara's "not worth the land" sign above her head. When Red Willow's residents saw them, windows cracked and drapes stirred, but no one moved. In such places, no one wanted to be first until there was no scandal. Silas Carter rode slowly in a wagon creaking with sacks of grains and hay and a hemp-roped tin furnace. His buffalo skin black coat was too heavy for spring, but it draped over him. Silas approached the fence to face Clara. She didn't flinch, but her legs buckled. Her bloodshot, shame-rimmed eyes flickered between the note and him. She didn't weep or ask for aid. Micah tried to speak. Silas raised one hand to calm him, then pulled a whittling knife from his coat and cut the cords with 3 exact strokes. First, Micah sagged but didn't fall. Then, Silas lay Clara and the boys on the wagon bed, wrapped his coat around them, and got back in the driver's seat as he passed the sheriff's station. The door creaked and Sheriff Elridge chewed a splinter against the post. He nodded Silas when Silas kept finding him. For the first time in a long time, Silas had guests other than shadows riding with him through the trees on his solitude, his land, which included a single-room cabin, a lean-to for feed, and a well that sometimes went dry in summer. He didn't ask their names, some stories shouted. The hut was half engulfed in crimson willow thickets that rustled even in silence in the grasslands. It had 1 door, 2 windows, and a chimney that usually coughed smoke rather than flames. It smelt like pine sap, cracked leather, and never-use ash. Silas placed Clara on his quilted feed, sack cot on pine planks, Everly on the braided rug near the fire, and Micah beside his brother. Micah didn't talk, but stiffened like someone used to being told no. Silas expertly kept the fire going. Everly sat up sleepy and crawled to the hearth without speaking. He didn't cry when he saw Silas. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and stayed erect, staring at him, as if daring him to explain. Silas didn't say anything, so he went to the pantry and got a tin dish from a covered cloth, splitting half a loaf of cornbread into chunks and putting them between the boys. Micah didn't reach, but Everly grabbed one with both hands when Clara opened her eyes. Evening, the hut was orange with firelight, and she smelt fat back and beans cooking slowly in the pot. Her body ached differently. She felt soothing warmth under her, which relaxed her spine. Silas turned and perched on a stool, painstakingly carving a little woodblock. Clara squeaked Where are they? Instead of looking up, he tilted his head towards the flame. She noticed Micah and Everly cuddled against his side, eyes closed yet awake. Silas nodded help without proof. She looked at him and saw a man built like a storm cloud, all quiet weight and rolling stillness. And for the first time in weeks or months, she didn't feel like a burden outside. The wind stirred the red willows inside, and the quiet wrapped them all like a second blanket. During chores, he was always one step behind or to the side, watching Silas like a boy studying whether to know which way the wind would blow. In contrast, he bloomed in the stillness, following Clara with soft questions and silent hugs and naming things. Pine stool became old and crooked. A gray hen outside the lean-to became missed trouble. And the small wooden carving Silas had set beside him on the first night, a bird in mid-flight. He carried that everywhere, even to bed. Clara asked nothing about. The land wasn't hers, but she noticed how the fence leaned, how the water bucket had a crack along its base, and how the tin roof hissed when wind came from the east. Clara asked Silas why he stopped chopping wood. Then she remarked, "But I was close." For days she had wondered why. Later that night, Clara cooked cornbread with pantry honey and poured hot corey for them. Silas took his cup, nodded once, and sat beside the hearth without saying. The boys were asleep, so Micah made a fist. Breathing slowly, always his father taught him that, Clara said, looking at Micah to relax. Silas stirred his drink. Father still around, Clara shook her head. Shot to Winter's back over a mule, not even a good one. Silas looked at her, finally looked, but he didn't. Say sorry. Clara was glad, for that pity felt like pity. No matter how softly it came, he had a brother, she said. Ambrose. Hayes' big man took over the land the debts claimed. The boys were his now, since they were blood, and I was just the widow. Silas set down his "I will," but not tonight. He nodded once, then stepped outside. She followed him to the doorway, saw him disappear into the dark, where only crickets and the whisper of willow branches remained that night. Clara dreamed of rain, not a storm, but a soft pattering against tin. She wasn't cold, and the boys were laughing. She woke up with tears on her face. Micah gazed down at the bird carvings on the sill. He carved them. Yep, Micah nodded. Once he didn't say anything more, but he sat by the hearth that night, closer than before. Clara asked Silas if he believed in fate. No. He responded, but I believe. Be in fixing what others break. She thought about that long after the fire died down, in the dark, with both boys breathing deeply beside her. And she thought maybe that was enough to build from the first time Clara stepped into Red Willow again. To trade eggs for flour. She left the boys with Silas, who had nodded once when she told him she needed to go. She corrected softly. He blinked. Of course. What can I help with? I've got eggs fresh this morning. I need flour coffee. If you can spare it. Sutter nodded and proceeded about the trade. Looking at her calloused, strong hands, she noticed him staring. Bet something wrong, and inquired. No, ma'am. Just folks been wondering where you ended up. Doesn't mean they ask. He handed her the sack with a weak smile. Well, you look better, stronger. She left without saying anything. The wind had picked up a grit between the walk's boards, and Clara saw Dory Miles, the mayor's wife, standing under the dressmaker's overhang. Her smile was sugar-laced venom. "It's good to see you up and about," Silas Carter said. Clara turned and let them, Dory startled at the sharpness in her voice. That night, Clara spotted Silas repairing a Leonta hinge, laid the supplies down, and watched him work towns. Chatting, she said, "They usually do." She folded her arms. "They think I'm a kept." Silas didn't pause. "I work every day. Feed your fire and animals, and split your wood, and that's not being kept." He looked up at her, then calm as dusk. "Don't let words bother you." Later that night, Clara heard Micah whittling outside and went onto the porch to find him carving something rough from a scrap of cedar. His hands were steady and his gaze focused. "What are you making?" she asked. "Not sure yet," he muttered. "I heard you believe town gossip about me." Micah shook his head slowly. "They didn't untie us." She swallowed the lump in her throat that weekend, when a traveling peddler named Clem arrived with a sack of potatoes and 2 hens. He handed Clara the items and leaned close. "Hearing you've been keeping silent." Micah stood in the doorway. "Jaw said you best leave." Clem laughed. "Fiery little thing." Clara intervened. "Take your wares elsewhere." Clem lifted his hat mockingly and went. Clara noticed Micah sitting alone with his jaw set. She remarked, "I didn't like the way he looked at you. You shouldn't have to protect me." He looked down. Silas crafted a new wooden bird with larger wings ready for flight and left it on the porch rail. Clara scooped it up and hugged it against her bosom and smiled for the first time. The wind brought rumor, but now it met resistance. Like trees trained to withstand a storm, October settled over the plains with a hushed weight. The mornings were sharper, the skies clearer, and the smoke from every chimney seemed to rise straighter, as if even the wind had decided to keep quiet. Clara mended clothes, gathered firewood with Micah, taught Everly his letters in the dirt, and carved, chopped, and fixed what broke. Clara stepped onto the porch, her hands tightening around Everly's shoulders. Ambrose Hayes dismounted before the horse stopped, his boots hitting the ground like gunshots. He was broad-shouldered with a moustache that curled like a sneer, and eyes hard from never being told no. He said, "Isn't this a picture?" Clara said, "That's not how you greet family." The standoff burned in silence. Micah, trembling behind Clara, picked up a branch, stepped forward. "Leave us alone." Ambrose turned, amused, until the branch hit him square in the ribs. That second was enough. Silas closed. The distance grabbed the man's wrist and twisted until the weapon dropped. He shoved Ambrose hard to the ground. The dust cloud seemed to carry all the town's old sins. "I didn't bury the last man who struck a child," Silas said. "But I do." Ambrose scrambled backward, his pride blooded more than his body. He mounted the horse and spat. "You'll regret this." "I'll be back." "Don't," Clara said. "Next time we won't let you ride away." He left fury trailing behind him like storm clouds. That night, no one spoke of it, but something in the cabin had changed. Micah didn't sit with his back to the wall. Everly laughed out loud while Clara made stew and Silas carved. Clara trembled as she touched the image. "You didn't have to do that." She said, "I did." Silas said, "And I would again." She didn't cry, but her chest ached light from someone finally standing for her in the garden. Micah created a little mound of stones where Ambrose fell as a marker, not a grave, to commemorate where the past fell away. The next day dawned, still sky burnished gold, and grey Clara walked the fence line with Micah inspecting where it needed patching. She pointed out which boards needed replacing, letting him do the marking. "You've got a good eye," she told him. He didn't answer, but the coarse Silas sat by the stove, sharpening his knife. Everly was curled at his feet, drawing horses with a stub of charcoal on old feed sacks. "You reckon Ambrose will come back?" the boy asked. Silas paused. "Maybe." "What happens if he does?" Silas thought for a long moment. "Then we remind him who we are." When Clara returned, she found a fresh log pile already stacked beside the cabin. Her gloves were warm, resting by the door. Where Silas had brought Clara saw Silas staring at the boys with cautious pride. Not ownership, but responsibility. Micah inquired why he helped us. Silas set his cup down. "Because once someone helped me." Clara looked at him sharply, but said nothing. He rose after dinner and stepped outside to mend the gate. Clara followed with 2 nails and a hammer. They worked side by side in the dusk. "Was it family?" she asked. "No, a woman." "No, then who?" Silas looked up at the stars. "A stranger didn't say more than 10 words. But I remember everyone." Clara leaned against the post. Silas turned to her, his face soft with remembrance, and murmured, "Don't let pain limit your world." She stared at him. She answered, "You didn't," Silas said, "and now I won't let it make yours." The maples along the creek had turned to flame, and frost rimmed the edge of every morning. Clara found comfort in routine rising. Before dawn, stoking the stove, collecting eggs, boiling water for Silas's coffee. It was a life with edges, but not sharp. One morning, Clara stepped outside and found a 3rd wooden bird on the rail with its wings spread wide, ready to rise. She picked it up, ran her tea. Everly donned boots. "We'll go into town today. Stores running low." Clara looked up. "All of us." He nodded. "Best they see us together." They rode into Red Willow. Crossing slowly, Silas never rushed the horses, and the wagon creaked like it had secrets as they entered town. Heads turned. The sight of Clara and the boys in the Carter wagon was a fresh whisper waiting to spread outside the general. Dory Miles smiled softly at Clara with a jar of preserves. "It's nice to see you out, brave," she said. Micah rarely spoke, so Clara found him outdoors carving a block of wood until his fingers cramped. "They called you names." He muttered without looking up. "I know they said he only took us in 'cause nobody else would." Sylvia's intervened, touching Clara's hand. Hidden behind him, Micah didn't respond. "World teaches you to expect unpleasantness, but sometimes it's wrong." Micah's voice cracked. "I hit one of them." "Did he bleed?" "We'll call it later." Silas discovered the boy's hand wrapped in a piece of cloth, placed a jar of balm on the ledge, said nothing, and went to bed. The next day, Clara prepared 3 more biscuits and set them on the porch rail. That night, a 4th bird emerged. On the sill, larger and stronger, Micah went up this time. "Please don't talk about my mother." Clem smiled. Clara joined Silas on the porch as the sun dropped behind the ridge. "I'm learning to stay," she murmured. You simply let me be sometimes. Letting be is the toughest thing, Silas said. She turned to him. What do you want from me? The stove glowed hot, and for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't wake from her sleep, nor did the boys. And in the stillness of that room, hope began to stretch. Like a cat in warm sun, quiet, unhurried, but undeniably present, winter whispered. At the edges of the days now, the creek had slowed, rimmed in brittle ice, by morn, slow and sturdy build. A gate keeps what counts, and she stared at it for a long time. Then Micah helped her smooth edges and measure joints. Everly used a stick to draw horses in the grass along the path. Silas watched them without intervening after fixing fences. Micah broke the silence. A gate might stop them. Micah thought he didn't smile, but nodded when they finished the gate. Stood straight, strong, Clara wiped her forehead and glanced at Silas. It opens both directions, he said, great. So no one feels confined. The four sat under the stars, with Clara resting on the porch post, with Everly in her lap and Micah whittling beside Silas. Pine smoke and distant snowfall filled the air. Dory Miles unexpectedly arrived the next day and stood at the yard's edge, with her arms wrapped round a pie tin. She beckoned Clara, who entered the porch and wiped her hands on her apron. Dory hesitated, wondering if we misjudged you. Dory coughed as Clara lifted an eyebrow. The priest said, Clara narrows her eyes. He may return, but tongues are talking, and marriage would fix things. Dory placed the pie on a stump, and Clara left without saying anything. Clara noticed Silas oiling the gate hinges outside the barn that night they want us to marry. She said he kept working. Do you want that? I don't want to be saved by a name. I'm not offering a name, said, unless you ask for it. She stood in silence for a moment, then walked back inside. On the table was another note that said, only roof-patch chickens need pen. You might say yes. She pressed the paper to her chest and felt the warmth of its truth. Later that week, a new figure appeared beyond the field. Not Hayes, but a drifter with a badge and a question. Micah met him at the edge. Silas, soon after the man asked about Clara. Silas didn't flinch. She's home, he said. The man tipped Clara had watched it all, and when Silas returned, she met him at the door. No questions, no praise, just a hand placed on his chest, right above where his heart still beat steady. The gate creaked softly in the wind, but it held. Like them, in a world that bent too easily, they had built something that did not. The next morning, Clara rose before light and stepped into the cold. She walked the length of the new gate, trailing her fingers over the grain of wood on the far post. A carving had appeared, one she hadn't noticed before, a simple crescent moon and 3 stars. She didn't ask if Silas made it. She knew. Micah came out, rubbing his eyes. What's it mean? She smiled. Means we've been watched and remembered that afternoon. She and Silas took the boys into the woods. They searched for winterberries and clean pine to hang in the cabin Everly Road. Silas's shoulders half the way, while Micah walked between them, finally content not to lead or lag. At dusk they returned. With arms full of green and red, Clara decorated the hearth with quiet care. Micah helped her hang pine cones on a string. Even Silas offered her nails without asking when the fire ignited and threw gold across the cabin walls she snuggled against him, and he never left. Everly fell asleep first. The Micah Clara stayed by the fire with her knees to her chest, and Silas beside her. They say, a gate means safety, she said softly. But it can mean welcome too, he nodded. It means what we build behind it. She reached out and took his hand, and he led her. The first snow came without warning, drifting down in thick, slow flakes that clung to every beam and branch. The boys ran outside in their socks, laughing so loud it had been years since she'd heard her son's unfettered, full-throated true inside. The cabin warmed faster than ever before. Silas had sealed the chimney flue better this time. Clara's patchwork curtains hung firm. Micah chopped wood without being told, and Everly fed the behends like a sacred chore. They were a family not by blood or law, but by the simple truth of presence. Day after day, effort after effort, silence after storm. In town, Pastor Norwich went by the store and told Mr. Sutter that the Carter cabin survived the first cold without church support. Maybe grace shows up outside the pulpit sometimes, Sutter nodded. By now, everyone had heard the tales of Silas Carter walking into town as a rancher and a man people tipped hats to at the cabin. Clara began stitching a blanket from old shirts and grain sacks, each square with a story. Red from Everly's first bandana, blue from her clothing when Silas found them, and soft gray from Silas's old coat sleeve would be thick and warm. Sheriff Elridge wrote and gave Silas a letter at the gate. He adds, Hayes, he ain't coming back. He's gone south, chasing ghosts. He adds, you've built more from quiet than most men build from noise. Micah carved animals instead of birds. Clara baked with a softness she hadn't felt in years. And Silas lingered one morning when Clara discovered him outside with an iron ring pressed smooth. Still silent, he held it out. Clara almost forgot what terror tasted like by the thaw. One morning, she heard actual birds singing and saw the first green sprouts through the cold. Micah erected a little bench at the gate and etched their names that afternoon. Clara, Everly, Micah, Silas, first names. If we keep choosing it every day. So they did. Some winters linger longer than expected. Some storms scream louder. But those who endure with grace develop something stronger than safety home.